All right, Calin, welcome back to episode two of Paragliding Banter. Uh, the last episode we spoke about passive safety and different gliders between the comparison between acro wings and XE wings, and it was very informative. And we spoke about how there are markers in certain maneuvers and where you do your SIV and how people should get in touch with you for SIV courses. We're going to move on to a few more things now in this second part. And I think this is going to be a far more engaging one in terms of our discussion as well as the information that we put out to the paragliding world. I would like to start with basics, Calin, and I thank you for your guidance on the questions that we should be discussing and the subjects that we should be covering. Let's start with the basic. Let's talk about aerodynamics. Let's go to, like you suggested, how does a paraglider actually fly? What are the dynamics involved in this? Once we once you give us some insight on that, then we'll go on to different maneuvers and we'll take it from there and we'll get a deeper understanding on different things. So could you just tell us a little bit about how a glider flies?
All right, so there are some fundamental misconceptions here. And those misconceptions can be traced to the reasons, which is usually just oversimplification and ease of teaching. But in fact, it creates the wrong idea in the pilot's minds. Uh, I want to dispel some of those and give a little bit of accurate insight so that people can explain themselves how the maneuvers work out. We're talking about handling of the paraglider. We're talking about maneuvers. If we don't talk about about aerodynamics, then it's all just a belief system. I believe you because you're saying so.
Right.
So to simplify it to the maximum. So I know we're a little bit under pressure of time,
Right.
because of course we can't stretch out for the full duration for the whole course that I'm making.
Yeah.
As the paraglider flies, because it's an aerodynamic profile, which means that when it's moving through the air, it's splitting the air in two layers. One goes over the top, the other layer of air goes under the bottom. And it splits in such a way that the air is accelerated on the top sail, and it's moving at a slower speed on the bottom sail, which creates, according to Bernoulli's law, a difference in the static pressure between the bottom and the top. So when I have more dynamic pressure, my static pressure decreases and creates this suction.
Right.
And this suction is what is responsible to the total lift force of the glider, and force that keeps us up. So as the air is moving faster, more dynamic pressure, less static pressure.
Right.
And of course, there is an overpressure from the bottom. So the static pressure is increased on the bottom, but more than 2/3 of the total lift force is because of the suction of the reduced static pressure.
Right.
So you can imagine the paraglider as being covered with suction cups.
Right.
And the suction cups are pulling on the paragliding fabric. Of course, more in the front, because this is where the air is mostly accelerated and less in the back. So what you see is little forces.
Right.
And if I'm trying to approximate here with my hand, I'm not pointing them up. Why? Well, because pressure, or let's say less pressure, suction, applies perpendicular to the surface of that is exposed to the airflow. Right. So here in front, I have them. You see, it's not up; it's in front.
Right.
And this has a traction component and a vertical component.
Right.
So the total vertical component, if we put it really simply, like vertical and horizontal, and we project those forces, I have the total vertical lift supporting the weight of the aircraft in balance in a non-accelerated flight, and the total horizontal component balancing for the drag on the other side.
Right.
So it's not, lift is not up, it's up and forwards.
Right. That's why the speed.
What pulls the paraglider through the air. Very important to understand. And now let's look on the span. And I see the paraglider flying like this towards you. Yeah. But the paraglider is curved. How to show it? Let's show only half of it like this. Yeah. Look, here's the middle of the glider. It's flying towards you. And now look at the shape. The paraglider is not like this. It's curved. So look at my lift on the side.
Yeah. So that's not really producing lift.
Stretches the glider.
Yeah.
It keeps it straight. The glider is not in shape because of the internal pressure. Yeah, there is a certain percentage, but it's a small percentage. Actually, the glider is kept in shape by the lift and the direction in which it applies.
Oh.
The stabilos are stretching its spanways, and on the curvature of the glider, you have lift here, 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 here. Look at them.
Right.
Okay, I'm exaggerating, yeah.
Right.
And this stretches it from front to back.
Right.
It stretches in all directions from lift.
Right. So the curved part of the wing really does not produce lift. It's on the top part of the glider which produces lift, but it is brought into that shape because the lift is actually pulling the glider outwards and creating the shape, and limited by the lines which are attached to you.
It's limited by the lines on the aerodynamic profile. So on this direction is limited by the lines, which actually the trim, which gives the airfoil its shape.
Yeah. And it's pulling it into shape from outside.
And this is with respect to the angle of attack, of course. But if it was flat like this, it would all collapse like this. Whoop.
Right. Correct.
Because the lines are pulling down and they're pulling towards the inside at the angle at which the lines are going. They're pulling towards the inside. There has to be a force that opposes that. Of course, in this case, the internal pressure has a little bit to do with it, but not so much. Imagine single skins. How do they fly? Well, you just have a leading edge, and that's all you have, and the rest is just the lift that's pulling the gliders in shape.
Right. Understood.
No internal pressure.
Wow, that changes a lot of things now. Wow.
But another thing that's really interesting, and here I come to you. I'm sorry for waiting. And here, another thing that I come to you is, so one is the shape, but look at the angle of attack.
Right.
So the angle of attack is critical because as I increase the angle of attack, what I do is I increase the difference of speeds.
Right.
The higher the angle of attack, the greater difference between how slow on the bottom the air is and how slow on the top, or how fast on the top it is, because the air has to travel a longer way, yeah, to go over the top. So now I am creating even a greater difference between the air speed on the bottom and the top, and this creates even more suction. And that's why I say the paraglider is like a machine that transforms air speed into lift. So when I increase the angle of attack, this machine becomes more efficient. It can produce more lift for the same speed.
Okay, I don't understand this. Maybe I can ask you a question to understand this more clearly. Let's say a glider is flying along. I'm flying the glider, and we are moving at trim speed, and I want to turn right. I am going to pull the brake on the right-hand side to the amount that I want, maybe let's say 30%, and this deforms the back foil, the back end of the glider, the trailing edge, and that creates a drag and slows down the glider, making it turn on the right, because now the drag is induced on the right hand side, but the left hand side is still at the same trim speed as it was before I touched the brakes. So isn't that how it would work?
No, that's wrong, and it's a very common misconception. It doesn't have much to do with drag, actually. It just has to do with exactly what I was explaining before. Okay. So angle of attack. Okay. So imagine that the paraglider, as I said before, it's a machine that is converting airspeed into lift. Okay. And the more I increase the angle of attack, the more efficient it is at producing lift. So it doesn't need so much speed to support the weight. Oh. Of course, it all reduces in the end to the weight, yeah? Oh. So let's say that at this angle of attack, and I'll get to your question, but follow me here because then you'll understand a little bit better. Okay. So this is my weight, okay? Let's say 70 kilograms. And I need, at this angle of attack, I need, let's say 30 kilometers per hour moving through the air to produce 70 kilograms of lift, simplified, yeah? Right. Well, suddenly I increase the angle of attack. Now I'm producing more lift for the same speed. So at the moment when I apply the brakes, and nothing to do with drag, please, yeah? When I apply the brakes, I increase the angle of attack, and momentarily I still have 30 kilometers per hour, but I'm producing more lift now. So what I do, I'm producing, let's say, 85 kilograms. And in this moment, I get a little bit lifted. And at the same time, the paraglider slows down because it doesn't need 30 kilometers per hour to produce 70 kilograms
Right.
of lift. It only, let's say, 25 kilometers per hour. So it slows down.
Right.
And now it's flying slower. It's flying at 25 kilometers per hour because at 25 kilometers per hour, with the improved angle of attack, with a higher angle of attack, with a more efficient angle of attack at converting speed to lift, it only needs 25.
Right.
And so on and so forth.
Okay.
When I push the speed bar, what I do is I decrease the angle of attack. So now the lift that the glider is producing cannot support 70 kilograms anymore. It supports only 60 kilograms. So it has to accelerate.
Right. It
My
has to
weight is
compensate by
pushing the
acceleration.
glider through the air. Exactly, and it
Right.
will balance it, say at 35 kilometers per hour. That's where it reaches balance. And now with the speed bar, I reached my balance 70 kilograms under, 70 kilograms lift, not at 30, because at this angle of attack is not possible, but it's possible at 35 kilometers per hour.
Correct. Because there is also a trajectory in the forward as well as the lift, which is created upwards. So it's
Of
moving
course,
at
now,
an angle forward and lifting up. Understood.
of course, of course. So, of course,
Wow.
there is this classical representation of the forces on the trajectory line, which is skewed like this.
Right.
And I don't like it so much because people don't really grasp it. You
Right.
need really good understanding of physics and
Right.
vectors, this decomposition. But at the same time, I can choose my axis as I want and explain it because physics allows that.
Right.
And I choose the vertical and the horizontal because it's more simple
Right.
to represent to people.
Right.
You know? So I have to accelerate. I
Right.
have to accelerate because I'm not producing enough lift. And now look at your question. These are the two sides of the paraglider, okay?
Right. Right.
And let's say we start with this angle of attack, and I'm flying straight. And then I apply one brake.
Right.
Okay, now I have a higher angle of attack here.
Right.
Momentarily, I have too much speed,
Right.
which means that I have an excess lift force here. At the moment when I increase the angle of attack, the lift force goes up.
Right.
And what happens? Because the paraglider is also curved, what I said, I get a little bit lifted on that side. And at the same time, I get with the glider rolling to that side because the horizontal component of lift, if I say half the glider,
yes.
so the horizontal component of lift here on the tip increases, which pulls my glider rolling to that side. So I get a little bit lifted and pulled. And now this side of the glider needs less speed to support the weight that is distributed to it, so it slows down. And the other one accelerates.
Got it. So for people who are listening and not actually seeing the gestures that you're making, when you apply the brake on the trailing edge, let's say I apply the right hand side brake, it is not the drag, but the lift that increases because the angle of attack now increases and the speed slows down. And because the speed slows down, now it compensates by increasing the angle of attack. And the angle of attack is not only on the top part of the glider, but also where the stabilo line is on the side, which is curved. So it creates a movement towards the stabilo line and upwards also, and slows that side of the glider, but the left side of the glider is still flying at that speed because the angle of attack over there has not changed. So therefore it turns on that side. So it's not because of the drag, but because of the lift that is generated because of the increase of angle of attack on the right hand side where the brake is applied, and it turns. Have I got that
Precisely. Precisely.
Wow.
The term brakes is stupid.
Right.
It's very practical because everybody can understand brakes, but they should be called ailerons. And in some languages in the world, they're called controls.
Right.
They're not called brakes.
Right. I always thought it was the, so when you're getting, let's say you come into a situation where the wind speed is increased and you want to descend and you do big years, but that actually pushes you back because you have a higher area which is now creating drag, and that's pushing you back instead of really going down. That's one of the things that's told to us. Yeah.
We can talk like this forever.
Yeah.
Let's see. At the moment when you're creating the ears, when you're putting the ears, what you're actually doing is you're reducing the surface load.
Correct.
Because you're having less of an aerodynamic foil to produce lift to support your weight. Right. So just as in the previous equation, at the moment when you're putting in the ears, what happens instead of producing lift on, let's say, 25 square meters of glider, you're producing lift only on 19 square meters of glider.
Right.
So it's not enough. The first thing the glider does, accelerates. It accelerates because it needs more airspeed on the open part of the glider that does produce lift
Right.
in order to support your weight.
Right.
Now, the tips that are folded do produce drag. That's right. And that also has the effect of slowing down the glider.
Further.
And that's why usually it's recommended to use the ears with the speed bar in combination.
Right. Correct.
It also stabilizes the glider. So ears are recommended in turbulent conditions because they stabilize the glider. As there is more airspeed, there is more internal pressure on the open part of the glider, which also helps. So in this case, internal pressure also helps quite a lot. And also you're reaching a more descent speed, because when you're accelerating horizontally, of course, you have to accelerate vertically as well, because that's where the engine, the actual generator of energy, is in the gravity.
Understood. I understood what you're saying. It eventually balances it out. So if you reduce the speed, it increases the lift, and if you increase the speed, it doesn't need that much lift. So it sort of moves that. It balances.
Yeah, if you increase it, but it's not
Yeah.
the speed you're
It's
working with. You're working with angle of attack
with
when
angle
you're
of attack.
working with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Angle
It's
of
a
attack.
byproduct.
That's all. They should be called ailerons.
Exactly. You're right. Awesome. Thanks for that clarification, Karan. That changes a lot of things now. I mean, the way I am thinking of other maneuvers, it's not the braking, it's actually inducing, slowing the glider down, increasing the lift to compensate for the loss of speed. And that's how we're creating the turns and other maneuvers. Now, this was just simple turn. Now imagine all the other maneuvers that we're talking about. Thinking about helico,
Everything can be
thinking about
explained with
sat.
this.
I would quickly like to move on to the maneuver that everyone starts off with, and that is the wing overs. And what I have understood is that everyone teaches them in a different way. And with what you've just said, that's going to add another. My mind is already working on what you just said, so I'm trying to sort that thing out in my mind. But there are markers that you mentioned in your last episode that the glider produces, and those are markers that you need to see and understand. So, could you tell us a little bit more about wing overs and how to master them?
Okay, let me put this into perspective. Let me frame this. You
Okay.
mentioned wing overs. It's one of the sacred words of paragliding.
Right.
And the other sacred word is flyback.
Right.
So what we talked before, in the previous episode, we were talking about limits and how to reach limits and how we can solve the problem of inching towards the limit by following a procedure that encompasses breaking the limit as well, going all the way to the whole range of movement, having a solution for it, having a protocol, a procedure for it that is safe with certain equipment, and after that, not having that limit as a do not cross line, but having it as a point in a process that is much bigger than that, and then acquiring 100% of the brake travel with confidence, and also being able to handle the consequences. And when it comes to paragliding handling, those two maneuvers are equally important: wing over and fly back.
Okay.
Because when we talk about wing over, we talk about energy manipulation.
Right.
We're manipulating kinetic energy and converting into potential energy on all three axes. So on all three rotations, then you have pitch, yaw, and roll at the same time combined. No wonder wing over is a difficult maneuver to perform, because you have to to synchronize all those three at the same time. It's complex.
Right.
It's not easy to teach. It's really hard to teach wing over. And that's why, to answer your question, I have to refer also to the flyback, as those two, in my opinion, are the backbone of maneuver, of handling and safety for a paraglider, irrespective of the model. Where we're talking about a basic ENA glider, or we talk about the highest CCC in the World Cup, or we're talking about the aqua glider that you're flying to perform infinite tumbling, it's all based on those two.
Right.
Wing over and flyback. And now, to get back to the wing over, now that I also took the liberty to introduce the flyback in this frame and in this format, as the father and the mother of all handling of paragliders,
Okay.
the wing over and the flyback. let me focus on your question with wing over. So there are many different techniques to teach wing over. And wing over, as I said, is an inherently complex maneuver for energy manipulation. My personal preferred technique within the course is to make a mechanical approach to wing over. So the thing is the following. There's absolutely too much information to process the whole thing. Inside brake, outside brake, both brakes, weight shift timing, and the attitude of the glider. Overwhelming. Cannot be learned in one go. So I make a mechanical approach. I start the procedure. I explain the procedure. I work on the simulator with the pilots, and after that, we put it in the air. And I expose them with three different voice cues. So I have like really three very simple voice cues, which is release and shift, pull, and both.
Okay.
Release, shift, pull, both. And at first we do two moves, and then exit on the side, exit on the side. The exit is very important. So I train my students to respond to these voice cues and to adjust the amount more or less when it comes to interacting with the glider in terms of pulling, how much to pull. And they learn this by practice. So we start with the basic, and then we amplify and exit, amplify and exit, and then we tune on the amount.
Understood.
So there are four main markers, not markers, quantifiers when it comes to interacting with the glider. Timing is most important. Timing. 2 is amount. So how much do I pull on the timing? 3 is weight shift. And 4 is the way of pulling. If it's a slow pull or it's a fast pull, which makes the difference in the maneuvers. So I give the timing and I give insights on the amount. And then the rest, combining in a wing over, combining the, for example, the yaw, combining the yaw with the roll effect and internalizing this as a reflex, as a muscle memory on the timing and the amount. This is done unconsciously, is done as a muscle memory building technique that is done by the pilot while doing it. As the brain makes the connections, just like an AI, it makes the connections between certain patterns and learns to recognize those patterns, which are feeling, seeing, the feeling of the wind on the face, and integrate those in that moment with the muscle actions of the hands. And once I create this skeleton of muscle memory by giving the timing mechanically, as the pilot gets to integrate those things unconsciously during the maneuver, so the brain connects those dots, then I continue further on, and then we go to one more turn, of course, following the correct procedure, which is an amplifying procedure.
Right.
And so we work on this. I divide wing over in 3 levels. So I have level 1, level 2, and level 3. Where top of level 3 would be mastery, where you perform maximum wing over on both sides with a certain given equipment. And level 1 is energy manipulation at the basic level without getting the glider under the horizon line. So no amplification higher than 90 degrees.
Okay, got it.
Which is basically about 70% of the piloting that we're needing as for efficient piloting in cross country. Making a dynamic turn, taking the energy and bleeding out in a dynamic turn, and all those exercises that are usually taught in piloting courses, like making a 360 and then connecting that 360 to a 360 on the other side, or pitching, and then with the dynamic of the pitch, making a fast turn on one side, and so on. And I'm condensing all those into one maneuver, wing over. And I go directly to the muscle memory of the student by this mechanical learning. And once the feeling for this energy manipulation starts to develop, and it does develop, because everybody learns muscle memory, once that does, then we can approach it at a more technical and theoretical point and work on details like outside brake amount or pull timing or attitude control and so on. So, with respect to safety, of course, because
of course. But I'm thinking, wing over is one maneuver which you can explain a lot, but unless you get into it and try it, you're not going to really understand it. And like muscle memory only comes from that. So autodynamics seems like a great place because you have enough height in one flight for you to do it several times?
With SIV students, like 80 flights and 10 hours airtime, that level of experience, I start working on wingover from the third flight.
Oh, wow.
Already. I
Nice.
introduce wingover from the third flight. In the lower height of the flight, they do the other maneuvers on top, the spirals and stuff, and we introduce the wingovers just for the feeling, for the understanding, and to get the idea how much and the amount, of course. And we work on level 1. And then when they're progressing, depending on the speed of progress, because everybody has a different speed of progress, we add more wingover into the training, or we just keep working on those things until I get my markers, because we talked about markers. It's markers that the pilot has within a maneuver. What he's looking for is cues for timing of the interaction with the glider, so that he doesn't need a teacher all the time, right? So after the course, he can replicate certain maneuvers, and he's looking at those markers to know where on the procedure he is. And I have my markers of muscle memory that show me that the student is ready to progress to the next level of maneuver when I see certain behaviors within the maneuvers or during the exit of a maneuver, which shows me, all right, this pilot has internalized the necessary neuromuscular programming level to perform the next maneuver safely.
Got it. Understood. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that. That was pretty deep and explains a lot of things. If you want to move on, would flyback be something that we need to discuss?
Yes. So exactly those two things. Wingover comes with dangers. So there are dangers at level 1, which are smaller dangers. There are other dangers at level 2, and there are other level of dangers at level 3. I never move up with a student from level 1 to level 2, so getting over the glider before they master flyback.
Okay.
And why is flyback so important? Well, it's the reset button. Everybody knows. And people say it's the stall. It's not the stall, guys. It's the flyback. Flyback is the magic. And now I take you back to aerodynamics and to the very thing I explained. The paraglider is an aerodynamic profile because when it's moving through the air, it splits the air in 2 layers. And I show that it splits it from this direction because it's so built. Because of the trim, it's so built that it would facilitate splitting from the leading edge, the air. But when I apply the brakes a lot, at this moment, over the critical angle, at this moment, the paraglider is not efficient at splitting the air from this direction at all anymore. Actually, the air cannot stick to the paraglider and becomes turbulent here. If it doesn't stick, we don't have any suction cups. Right? So in this moment, it's very efficient at this angle of attack. It's very efficient at flying backwards. So when it stalls, it actually surges backwards. That's why the glider falls behind. It doesn't fall behind because it's heavy. It falls behind because it's pitching backwards as it starts to fly backwards. And now I have aerodynamic processes happening here. So I'm getting lift on the trailing edge. And my brakes become A-line. So in a flyback, my brakes are A-line. And why is it so amazing? Well, because the dynamics of the glider flying on the trailing edge is very different than the dynamics of the glider flying on the leading edge. In what way? Well, of course, the glide ratio is about 1. So you're flying basically on a trajectory of 45 degrees in the flyback. Second, spiral dive is not possible. Auto rotation is not possible. And it clears out the cravats. It's amazing because if I have a cravat, what happens? Reposition. I'm just showing. I'm the middle of the glider. Yeah. So the tip folds in through the lines, and the airflow from the front it keeps it in. It can't open. But if I put it in flyback, look, poof, opens up.
Yeah, because
so safety.
Yeah.
With the flyback, I hit two rabbits with the same arrow.
Right. So
I clear cravats.
Yeah.
And I prevent auto rotation. Yeah. Amazing. Very safe place.
That's amazing. Yes. I'll just go back to the first part where you said that we increase the angle, we increase the brake to a point where we raise the angle of attack of the leading edge to a certain level, to a critical level, where the air does not flow over it anymore and doesn't stick, doesn't produce lift.
Yeah.
But now the trailing edge becomes your leading edge because that's where it's flying, because since nothing is going over the leading edge, there's low pressure over here, and this creates lift. Would
Yes.
that be right to say?
Yes, the airflow inverts.
Inverts, and then the lift, it goes to the trailing edge, and that creates more lift. And now and because lift is created, there's also speed, which is now flying backwards.
Exactly.
And because it's flying backwards now, the cravats and everything that's being stuck in the front because of the wind coming in from the front is now being pushed out because now the wind is coming from back, and that clears a lot of. That's why it's called the reset button. So backfly is the reset button, not the stall. The stall is the way to get into backfly.
Exactly. The stall is a way into going to backfly. And and here I'm going to make an honorable mention.
Okay.
We've all been taught that after a frontal collapse, we have to release the brakes so that we don't accidentally stall the glider. Why this danger of stalling the glider from a frontal collapse and not from normal flying? Because it's much more sensitive. And I will explain it.
Okay.
So here we have a paraglider flying. So I have this lift force process active here, which is actually pulling the glider forward. We talked about the
leading edge.
Where is my pen? Yeah, we talked about the lift force, the total lift on the glider not being directed up, but up and forwards on this axis, vertical or horizontal, because I don't complicate it. Right. All right, so it's like this. So I have a traction. I increase the angle of attack. This force becomes greater, paraglider slows down, and then it becomes just the same as before, balancing the weight. You can always just balance the weight, of course. Energy conservation principle. Yeah. So now I increase the angle even further. Okay, it's even slower. Now the air doesn't follow the whole paraglider anymore. It's following only up to here. From here, it's very difficult for the air to stick to the paraglider, becomes turbulent. So I'm producing only lift on this side, on this part of the glider, on the front part of the glider. The same lift, it keeps pulling the glider forward, and I have to increase it to the critical angle at which it cannot produce enough lift to hold the pilot on this very, very, very small area here, and the lift process stops.
Right.
This is, my brakes are at 100%.
Right.
This is the stall point. This is the limit speed of the glider. This is that point when the glider starts stalling from normal flying.
Right.
But now look at my angle here.
Right.
It's very steep backwards. So then it stalls and aggressively goes back.
Tail slide.
Now look, stall. This is for stall. Okay. This is a stall point, full stall point. Now, look at my paraglider here. I do a B stall.
Right.
There's a B stall, right? So my B's are here, and when I do a B stall, now at the moment when I've done this, the lift is gone.
Right.
The air is not going to follow in this shape. Yeah. That's totally done. It's good. So in this moment, I'm hanging on the B's and I'm coming down like this. Right. In this situation, in this form, the lift process is very little. There's a little bit of lift going on here, a little bit of lift on the back here, and the paraglider shape is like this. Right. I'm hanging on the air resistance from down. Right. So overpressure from the bottom. Yeah, that's what I'm hanging on. Right. And then I release the B. Poof. The paraglider comes in shape. But now, if my brakes are pulled just as 50%, so not full 100%, just at 50%, attention, there is no lift happening in this moment.
Right.
But my brakes are at 50%, and now at 50%, my aerodynamic profile is still more efficient at flying backwards than on forwards. Right. Because I don't have all this lift process already happening to fight and to increase the angle of attack. And only with 50% brakes, at the exit of a B stall or a frontal collapse where the wing is stalled. The wing, there is no aerodynamic process on the glider when it's frontal collapse, full frontal collapse. And then only 50% of the brakes is enough to convince this aerodynamic profile that it's more efficient at flying backwards than forwards, and I slide into the flyback.
Right, understood.
And this is important to understand, that the amount of brake needed to stall a glider from normal flying is almost double the amount of brake needed to make a glider into the flyback when it's already stalled. Right.
Understood. Okay, just for the sake of people who are listening and who didn't have who are not seeing the video, the way you explained, I'm just going to quickly summarize this. So if we're taking the cross section of a glider with the leading edge on the left-hand side and the trailing edge going down the right, under normal flying situation, the entire part of the surface of the top part of the glider produces lift, but it follows the curvature and design of the wing. If your leading edge is shark nosed, then the lift is produced up and front in the front and upwards in the middle of the glider, depending on the shape of the glider. So when you start braking and reducing the profile of the glider, the lift keeps going upwards, and only a limited part of the glider is now producing lift. The front part of the glider, the back surface of the area of the glider is not producing lift, and that's why it sort of goes into backfly, because that's not enough. When you are when you're really adding more brakes, the lift that is being produced by the glider on the surface area becomes so small that the lift evaporates, goes away, and then it goes into backfly, because the back end is at an angle which is more dynamic, which is more suitable for flying than the front end, and that's why the backfly.
Exactly. The back becomes more suitable for flying than the front part. And then the paraglider starts to fly backwards. That's why we call it flyback.
Amazing. That's a great example. Clears a lot of things. Wow. All right, Calin, that's a lot to take, and suddenly I feel like I'm back in paragliding school at P1. That's awesome. Let's move on quickly then. Should we talk about rotations?
About rotations, yes. So let me make a few notes first to summarize.
Right.
I did say that wingover is the father of all piloting, and flyback is the mother of all safety. Have it so. And I challenge everyone on listening to this podcast to convince me otherwise. In 26 years of flying, I have not found the logical fundaments to challenge this statement that those two maneuvers are the thing in all flying and safety.
Right.
So rotations. Rotation is very useful, but it's very dangerous as well, because it comes with G-force. And G-force comes with reduced blood flow to the brain.
Right.
And reduced blood flow to the brain comes with potentially blacking out.
Right.
And blacking out comes with panic. And panic comes with passing out, so with unconsciousness. Clear distinction. Blacking out does not mean passing out. It's just the computer turning off the graphics card because it just consumes too much resources. But the core processor, oh, you keep conscious, my friend. You can stay very conscious while not being able to see. Right. The only problem is that when you don't see, you panic. Yeah. And then you use up 4 times more oxygen than normal, and that makes you pass out. So notice, blacking out does not mean passing out. When it's black, it's not over. Anyways, rotations. So rotations carry also a lot of energy, and they carry also rotational energy just as they carry a lot of kinetic energy, translation, movement, linear movement energy. And management of that energy is technical. Right. So then we talk about this whole family, spiral dive, nose down, SAT, auto rotation. We talk about locked spiral as well as a family. Yeah. And when we talk about those rotations, it is very, very important that the pilots that subject themselves to these maneuvers have a good understanding about energy manipulation in practical terms before they attempt such maneuvers. And a critical component here is the importance of the outside brake. So the brake opposite of the side of rotation, because that is what we use to control the rotation. That is what we use to stop the rotation. That is what we use to prevent the consequences of those rotations. The outside brake. In my courses, the voice command outside brake is at equal importance with throwing the rescue.
Oh, okay.
these are the two voice commands that are class 0 in my course. I have a system of classification for the voice commands, and those are the only two class 0 that are supposed to be executed immediately by the pilot without any second thought. So my students, I teach my students that when they are performing in the course, when they hear outside brake, they should pull it mechanically, automatically, without questioning it. Just as throwing the rescue has to be an instant, clear, and precise move, without discussions. And all the others are a different category on the other voice command.
Understood.
So, ask me questions about rotations. What would you like to talk about?
So, let's talk about SAT. As you've given me a lot of things to think about, but let me stick to what I knew before you explained to me about about how the lift is generated, but that's and how I thought SAT was. So I've done SAT a few times, and what I think about SAT is when you get into SAT, you first get the glider into a nose down position, and as the glider is going to just touch the horizon, you pull the inside brake, and what that does, it slows down the inside part of the glider, and but the outside part of the glider is still going at a certain speed. So it has got nowhere to go but under the glider, because the front part of the glider has become slower, and that becomes perpendicular to the horizon, and that's your SAT. I'm sure my understanding is not right. Can you explain to me?
Yeah, well, there's short time and there's a lot to take in.
Yeah, maybe
the direction of the little suction cups that cover the glider.
Right.
So think of it differently. Just as we said before, I'm going to show with my hand, but I'm really going to try to explain it so that the words are sufficient. This is difficult for me. I'm sorry. I have Latin blood. You know, if you want to silence up an Italian, you just have to tie his hands back to the back of his, and then he will not be able to speak. So
yeah, I understand.
But I'm going to try. So look, why does the paraglider roll in a turn? Because we're talking about roll here. You can talk about SAT without talking about roll. Right? So at the moment when I apply the brake, I create more lift on the brake that I'm pulling, right? I'm making the angle of attack increase. We talked about it. So the horizontal component on the stabilo region of that respective brake, the lift force that is horizontal because it's perpendicular to the stabilo, becomes greater and than on the other side. And this, imagine like catching the tip of the glider with a hand and pulling it.
Okay.
And this pulls the glider from the vertical from above towards that respective side on the roll, and then reaches a balance once you're making your turn, whatever you're making. And then if you pull it more, it pulls even more on the tip, pulls it deeper, and in that moment the glider falls into the spiral. And now we're talking about this force, this horizontal component of lift force on the stabilo region on the right-hand side. Let's say I'm pulling the right brake, right? Simplify. And now it's going down and it's at an angle to the horizon. This is a spiral dive. The right tip is lower relative to the horizon line. Yeah. And then the left tip. And this creates an angle. That's the angle of the spiral with the inside tip down. And now I pull more. And when I pull more on the brake, I increase that force difference, that horizontal on the plane of the glider difference. And now that tip gets pulled even harder, which makes the glider actually fall towards the nose down. And now in the nose down, you see the increased horizontal on the glider attitude plane, not on the ground plane, so the horizontal along the span, on the tip, this force here is what fuels my rotation.
Right.
And that's what makes the glider turn so much in the nose down. And I get all that G-force because of this horizontal force here.
So the tip is creating the lift, and therefore, since a small area is creating the lift, the speed is increased.
Of course. And now at the nose down, I have the maximum. This is my maximum rotation speed in revolutions per second. That's why in the nose down, I reach the highest amount of G-force for a sustained movement, which is around 4.5 Gs. And now look at this. I'm having this force here which keeps the glider turning. But if I pull the outside brake,
right,
I increase the horizontal lift on the other side, which fights this lift and then reduces the rotation. So I'm not turning so fast. At first, it slows down the rotation. And then as I keep it pulled, it pulls this tip up now.
right.
And my spiral comes out. You
Comes
see?
out.
So the lift, the span-wise lift on the stabilos. That's what makes the glider spiral. That's what gets the spiral out.
Wow. So, oh wow. Wait, hold on. This is amazing. So when you have the glider nose down, the lift that is being produced, and the reason why it's going on, and if you pull the right, it's going on the right, because the right stabilo is creating the lift, and it's going on the
More
right hand.
lift.
Sorry, and the forward speed.
Yes, it's lift, but I'm talking about the span-wise.
Span-wise, yeah.
The span-wise component of that lift. It's not only span-wise.
Yeah.
The lift is also perpendicular on the middle of the glider and so on. I'm talking about the stabilo.
Right.
The stabilo. The span-wise lift on the right stabilo is much greater than the span-wise lift
on the
left stabilo. And this is what pulls the glider through the air to rotate. I mean, all that rotation needs to come from somewhere, no?
Right. And then when you pull the outside brake, which is the left-hand side, the lift on the perpendicular side of the opposite side of the stabilo line increases, slowly lifting the wing. And if you increase the brake further, it sort of increases the lift, but it also takes a lift upwards, pulling the glider out of the rotation and back onto the top, obviously with a little dynamic part. But that's how you get it. That's why it works.
Exactly. Super simplified and talking on only one direction, span-wise direction, it reduces the effect of the increased lift on the right side and ultimately cancels out the very engine that sustains that rotation on the roll direction in a spiral. I said I'm going to talk only about the roll now to keep it really simple.
Right. Understood. Wow.
And reduce the rotation, spiral comes out. And now let's talk about your SAT.
Yeah.
Because that was the question.
Yeah.
So now I'm in nose down. Right. And I keep pulling this brake.
Yeah.
So this lift is even greater now. And something really interesting happens is in combination with what you said, because there is also a line direction component of the lift, so like a forwards lift as well. But what happens is that as this force even increases furthermore, look what it does. It pulls the tip up.
Ah, okay.
And now, not only I have rotation, I do have rotation, but this lift, this span-wise lift, that's to actually support my weight now.
Ah, okay.
So at the transition point, at this point, the span-wise lift is just fueling the rotation.
Right.
And at the moment when I pull it even more, it starts to take some of my weight.
Right.
And that's why the steeper the SAT, the slower it moves.
Correct.
Because less of this lift is going into fueling rotation, and most of it now is just supporting my weight. Right. And you're going to see in a stable and slow SAT, the total weight of the aircraft, so you and the glider, okay, but basically your weight, if you reduce it to one axis, vertical axis, the most of it, 90% of it, is hanging on the stabilo.
Wow.
And on the lift produced by the stabilo, cutting through the air and rotating in the SAT. So you're hanging on the stabilo, basically.
Wow. And that's why, oh, wow, okay. Understood. So for the people who are listening, we are, I'm going to try to summarize this. So we are in nose down dive, and and on the right hand side, and the stabilo is producing lift, which is horizontal to which is parallel to the horizon, and that's why we are turning and going in speed. But as you increase more brake on the inside part, which is the leading part, it starts now not only producing the directional movement, but also starts producing lift, which lifts the glider up towards us. And now, the higher you increase the brake, the more lift it produces, and therefore it goes slower because higher lift, lesser speed to compensate. And the top part of the stabilo span wide is now producing enough lift for us to hang in there. and that's your scent, and not because of the drag. I hope
Nothing to do with drag, my friend. Yeah.
nothing to do with drag. That's what I thought. So yeah, wow, that's amazing. I think it'll be much more clearer if I put this podcast video on YouTube. People can see how you've explained this. I'm trying my best to explain to them in words, but yeah, hopefully
Please,
they'll combine both.
please put a disclaimer for my vaping habit. I
Yeah,
don't want to encourage people into
I will
usage
do
of
that.
nicotine. I'm really sorry for that, though.
Calin is vaping while we're speaking, but yeah, there's a disclaimer. Don't do it. It's not good. All right, Calin. Should we speak about the famous auto rotation? People who get into spiral dive for the first time through auto rotation, and that's their first experience.
That's not auto rotation. So auto rotation is not because you're going in the spiral for the first time. When you're going in the spiral for the first time, you're at risk at experiencing spiral neutrality, also known as locked spiral.
Right.
Now, what's a locked spiral? Well, you're in nose down and you're releasing both brakes and weight shifting outside. And the glider does not come out, keeps going crazy down. Now, this will not stop with certain gliders, not all the gliders, but some gliders get spiral neutral. And even if you do this, they don't come out. This is called locked spiral. And you're going to say, okay, how this can be? I mean, you're symmetrical. You're with the hands up. You're even with the weight shift to the outside. Why doesn't it come out? And I will leave that question hanging in the air. This is a challenge for everyone who listens to this podcast to present me with an aerodynamics explanation on why is this happening. I do know the answer, and I have that explanation, but I would like to pose this challenge and to see. It all has to do with angle of attack and the forces, aerodynamic forces on the stabilo region. So but if you also can tell me why, I'm going to give you an A+, and I'm going to be super happy that somebody actually took up this challenge. So I will not answer that question.
Okay,
but
cool.
That's locked spiral.
So everyone who's listening and wants to explain this can put down the comments on the podcast, and I'll share it with Calin, and we'll get in touch with you, and maybe even talk about the right answer on our next episode before we start that episode. So thanks, Calin. That's interesting. So what I meant with the first
about the auto rotation and definition of auto rotation, because you mentioned it. Should I get into that?
Yeah, sure. I just want to clarify, when I said they get into spiral for the first time, I didn't mean that. What I meant was when they get into auto rotation and an SIV, sometimes it's the first time they experience what a higher 360 or faster 360 looks like, leading towards spiral dive later on. But that's what I wanted to say. Maybe it didn't come out clear. But yes, please tell us about auto rotation.
We usually define auto rotation, as far as I know. I mean, as I said, the terms are not completely standardized. Just as some people call the flyback the tail slide, and there's two different things. Tail slide is completely different thing. But people use those terms interchangeably, just so there can be confusions with auto rotation and what it means. As far as I refer to it as a term, auto rotation is defined by a collapse corner. So you can get into auto rotation as an exercise.
Just repeat that, because I think your voice just dropped over there. People hear it.
Okay, so I usually refer to auto rotation as the movement, the rotation movement that can, sorry. So I usually refer to auto rotation as the movement that follows up as a consequence of a collapse or a cravat on one side of the glider, which is the moment when the turning effect of the collapsed side or the cravated side is unchecked. The pilot does not keep direction, lets the glider degenerate, does not weight shift to the other side, does not attempt to keep direction in any way, lets himself be turned around. And in these situations, this can ensue that the glider does a SAT motion. That is fueled by the changed aerodynamics of that tip, be that collapse or be that a cravat. It is a dangerous movement. It is uncontrolled, especially with cravats, because collapses usually open by themselves before an auto-rotation can ensue. However, cravats don't. And this is one of the major causes for accidents in flight for cross-country pilots, that in cascade events of mismanagement of collapses or mismanagement of frontal collapses, they end up with a cravat. Guys, in normal flying, if you don't go through a cascade event and you do correct collapse and frontal collapse management with all gliders from ENA to ENC, you will not get cravats. But with END and CCC gliders, depending on the importance of the collapse, even if your technique of managing that collapse is correct, you still might end up with a cravat.
Right.
And one thing to know is that the turning effect of cravats is about 4 times more pronounced than the turning effect of a collapse of the same size. So if I get a 20% collapse, I'm going to get a certain rotation, let's say, factor. But a 20% cravat is going to turn me as much as an 80% collapse would. And I don't want to get into the aerodynamics of this. It's quite simple, actually, but I really need my hands for this. So it's that the stabilo shape, the shape of the stabilo region changes a lot in that moment. And the horizontal lift, the span-wise lift that we were talking before, that fuels the rotation, increases dramatically in the moment when we have a cravat, and also drag. And those work together. So the drag and the increase of aerodynamic lift on the span-wise direction both generate exactly what we were talking before at the maneuver side. And in that moment, the collapse or cravated tip gets pulled up. And now it's not because of my brake input from the inside brake, it's because of the shape of the glider in that situation.
That's correct. Yeah.
And escape from this is the outside brake.
Right.
Escape from this is the outside brake, because only by increasing the span-wise lift on the opposite corner can we counteract this rotation movement. However, and this is a warning, if I fail to keep direction with the cravat when the cravat has occurred before the rotation kicks in, once the rotation is fully developed, and G-forces can go quite high,
right.
Even exceed 5 Gs in some extreme cases. So once that rotation is established, it is much harder to stop that rotation, to slow it down and stop it, than it is to prevent it in the very first place.
Right.
And here is the rule number 1 of safety in my safety course, which again is flyback oriented in the safety region. Once a pilot can handle flyback and the stall behavior of the glider reliably, in this moment, there can be no excuse to let the glider turn us in case of an event. So keeping direction is paramount,
right.
Just as keeping direction with the collapse.
Right.
So I'm not going to let that glider turn me, because it can degenerate into auto rotation with the cravat in this situation. And then it will be much harder, and in some cases even impossible, to pull the outside brake sufficiently to exit that rotation. And then my only option left is rescue.
Right.
Now, the problem with auto rotation is, due to the high rotation speeds, it is a very high likelihood that the rotating glider is going to eat my rescue after deployment.
Right.
And now I have a rescue in my lines, and the auto rotation keeps going, and there's a lot of energy into it.
Right.
And unfortunately, this is one of the major causes of accidents. So avoid the auto rotation. Avoid the situations that give you cravats. And if you do get a cravat that's turning you, keep direction. And if you cannot keep direction, stall the glider, go flyback, exit the flyback, and you're done with it. Don't let it degenerate into an auto rotation.
That's very, very good advice. Understood. It's amazing advice. We recently had an accident with one of our pilots in our group, and sadly we lost her, and it was mainly this. So this hits in pretty hard for us. All right.
Safety, flyback, trust in flyback, but you need to learn the flyback in a controlled environment. Don't try to teach it yourselves.
Right.
Because the exit procedure of the flyback and the markers to identify the moment when the glider is flying, the moment when the glider is falling in the stall, the positions of the hands to obtain that stable and nice flyback, because there is one, the search for that point, and the perfect understanding of the moment and the markers for a flyback exit when performed alone, the procedure after the flyback exit. These are important things.
Right.
And these are very important things to know before attempting this maneuver. Otherwise, we can release the exit of a flyback state at an unfavorable time, for example, when the glider is pitched far behind, and then we can have glider contact and line contact, which complicates the situation furthermore.
Right. Understood.
So this is to be learned in controlled environments, not a self-taught technique. But we got pretty deep here.
Yeah.
Ask me your next question.
All right. I think we are coming to the I mean, I would love to go on with this a lot, but I think we also have a time restriction for our podcast. I would start towards the end of this, and I would like to ask you about your safety briefings. I think that's very important since we are on the safety aspect of this. Could you speak a little bit about this and explain to us?
All right. To all my SIV students, I have the theory and safety briefing module, which is usually about 6 hours in total. I do this with every student from every level, from pitch control level to twisted infinity level. I have so structured this briefing that it applies to all level of pilots, and it applies to all types of paragliders. Of course, there are some exceptions, and not necessarily exceptions, but particularities. And I'm going to tell you what I teach. I teach aerodynamics at the level that we talked, but more in detail. I teach flight mechanics, energy, rotation and energy, kinetic potential energy, saving actions and preventive actions as manipulating a paraglider. After that, I go to the safety briefing. And now the safety briefing, there are 6 dangerous situations. Only 6, no more. The rest situations are dangerous only if the pilot doesn't know the procedure, but I treat them as maneuvers, not as dangerous situations. Like, for example, stall, flyback, spin. They are all maneuvers. In my books, they're maneuvers. You learn the maneuver, you can handle them, you can control them. There's no problem. They're not dangerous. They're only dangerous if you don't know them. Spiral dive. It's very dangerous to a beginner pilot that has no idea. Of course, but once you learn it, then it becomes a skill. It's a maneuver.
Right.
So dangerous situations, side collapses. In order of danger, side collapses, frontal collapses, cravats, and cravat management. Twist, riser twist or line twist. Level 4. Level 5, auto rotation and locked spiral. Those are treated together.
Okay.
And level 6 is falling in your lines and canopy.
Oh, okay. Well, that's right. The falling into bit, but it also depends on the height that you have, right?
That's the good news. I mean, we're gonna avoid this as much as we can, right? That's the last thing we want. The second last is auto rotation with the cravat, or a twisted auto rotation with cravat. No, the one before the second, so the third last would be a riser twist.
Right.
You see, so it's like this. About the falling in the lines and canopy, there is this misconception that if you fall in the glider, you're dead. It's not the case. It just depends on how much height you have to fall into.
Right.
Because if you have like 400 or 500 meters or more from impact, due to the free fall nature and the forces, the drag increasing with the exponential increase of the speed, the paraglider, as it's flapping, it's going to flap asymmetrically and spit you out of it. The chance for this is very high. It's about 95% chance, 95% chance that the glider will spit you out in a free fall of 300 meters total. And then once you're out of the glider, you can, most of the times, throw the rescue and save your life. Right. So it's not the end. It's just a very, very horrible experience to go through. But if you have a height, but when things happen at low height with a lot of speed, the chances diminish rapidly, unfortunately. And that's why the importance of safety height to terrain cannot be overstated. It is impossible to overstate.
Understood. I'm guilty of that. I need to get more height when I do my maneuvers. All right, good. So, Calin, what you have actually done is you've changed my understanding, and I'm hopeful that the same thing is what the listeners are getting. Uh, this changes a lot, specifically the fact that it's lift that's creating the turn and not the drag, and explanations of your markers and explanation about how the sack works and auto rotation. And it's just been an eye opener, and I've not had so many eye openers in such a short time. And I've been flying for over 14, 15 years, and it still comes as a surprise or new information to me, and hopefully to all the paragliders who are listening to you. So I really want to thank you for sharing this with us and giving us a different take on this. I would love to come to your SIV soon and learn the proper way again. And I think in our sport, education is always continuous, and it's good to be up to the mark all the time. So I would encourage everyone else who's listening to come to your SIV. And I would also want to thank Clint for connecting us, and he has got some glowing reviews about his experience with you. And I think when he comes back, he's going to be a different pilot. So, Calin, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and this is going to be one of the longer podcasts on paragliding banter, and totally worth it. So, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
I would like to conclude this podcast with my greatest advice that I can give. And that is that I urge everyone, all the listeners, to be aware of one very important thing, is that at the moment that we believe we know something, we block ourselves from the experience of learning it. So I say that the number one block that stops people from learning is believing they already know the answer.
Right.
Being aware of this opens doors and helps you enrich your paragliding experience. Follow logic, follow science, and keep your curiosity ongoing.
Awesome.
I try to do the same for myself.
Awesome. That's really right. A good sound advice. Thanks, Alan. And hope to see you soon.
Thanks again for having me. And I want to apologize if the technical level was a little bit high. I can put it in more simple words, maybe in different formats or with more time to explain and with different tools of teaching. But for now, yeah, if it was a bit too heavy.
Sorry, Calin, you've gone on mute. We can't hear you. Sorry, Calin.
Hello.
I think your phone went on mute. We couldn't hear the last part.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was just saying sorry for being so technical, but it's the only way.
Yeah. No worries.
All
I
right.
think technical is good, and I think we've got a lot of information from this, Calin. And hopefully, I get to see you soon and fly with you. Appreciate this. And I would also like the listeners to comment and let us know that if you want another session with Calin and want to ask him any questions, please do write in, and we will get Calin back, and hopefully he has some time, and we'll ask him questions in much more simpler way if needed. But I think today was good, and thank you, Calin. See you soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Feel free to contact me if you would like to make another episode based on those two episodes with more simplified information, with more clarity, with more, how to say, touching the social aspects of paragliding and the way in which learning itself is being let's say, is happening in the paragliding community, I am available for that, and I can also prepare some material on targeting questions to simplify my my language and my technical terms and everything to make it more digestible for viewers. And it would be my pleasure. We can do this anytime. You can ask me questions. You have my WhatsApp number. You can also share my WhatsApp number to people that are interested, and it's no problem for me to be contacted, especially if they have target questions on topic. I'm happy to do that as well.
Awesome. We'll do that. I will put that in the description, and we'll come back to you and get more on paragliding from your point of view, and hopefully we will spread the word and knowledge to people. Never stop learning. Thank you very much.
Never stop learning. Never stop yourself from learning. Let's make it so.
Awesome. Thanks. Goodbye.
All right. A pleasure for me as well, Sajid. Yeah.